All right, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today is part 3 of our 4-week financial literacy series. I am your co-host, Jerome Franks, president of CFA Society of the Bahamas, and thank you all for joining us once again as we discuss the topic, home ownership, what you need to know. Today we'll be joined by Elbert Thompson. He is a real estate broker and senior appraiser with over 16 years of experience. As I would have mentioned last week, CFA does not endorse or recommend any individual or company over another. The purpose of our seminar is to provide credible information to assist you in your financial development and journey. So, with that being said, we do recognize the importance of having industry experts like Elbert who can speak to current issues and also answer any questions that any of you guys may have. So similar to our previous topics, home ownership is also very important and has also been a very popular and hot subject recently. Especially given the recent announcement, as we all know, of the government service lots. In general, I think with our culture, Bahamians generally put great value on owning a home. The problem is a lot of times people aren't prepared to seize real estate opportunities when they arise and they end up missing out. So the purpose of our discussion today is to explain to you everything that you need to know so that you're better prepared to begin your journey towards home ownership, or maybe even assist you if you're interested in real estate as an investment. We want to assist you to be prepared so that you're able to capitalize on opportunities whenever they present itself. So, like last week, if there's anything or something in particular not addressed in the presentation, please feel free to ask your questions at the end. You can submit your question to the host using the chat feature in Zoom, or you can raise your hand and you can ask your question directly to Elbert if you prefer. So without further ado, I'll introduce our organization very briefly, and then I'll introduce Elbert. So CFA Society of the Bahamas, we're an organization of financial and investment professionals. We generally hold or are pursuing the Chartered Financial Analyst Charter or CFA Charter designation. If you're interested in learning more about the society or the CFA designation, please feel free to visit cfasociety.org/Bahamas. So as I mentioned earlier, our speaker is Elbert Thompson, and he will be discussing the topic, home ownership, what you need to know. Elbert is an accomplished, trusted luxury real estate broker and senior appraiser in the Bahamas. He has over 16 years of real estate experience where he has generated a strong global and local network to assist clients to realize their goals in a timely manner. He has a strong foundation in finance, sales, and communications, and is an expert in real estate management, negotiations, and client relations. He's a certified international property specialist, certified residential specialist. He also served as the Bahamas chapter president in 2011 and previously served as a board member with the Bahamas Real Estate Association for the past 4 years, chairing the international committee. He loves public speaking, photography, and experiencing various cultures and adventures. His declared mission is to inspire, enlighten, and communicate truth to the world. Elbert, thanks again, and I hand it over to you for.
A year ago, I gave a presentation to this group at the University of the Bahamas. And at that time, this was, of course, pre-COVID when we could actually still meet in person. And since then, the whole thing has been about pivoting, but the basic foundation of homeownership remains the same. There are just a few things that you have to be aware of now that we didn't have back then that I'll touch on in this presentation. Can you see my screen okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, everything is fine.
Okay, all right, good. So we'll take it from here about home ownership and what you need to know. And so here's just a brief graphic for persons to just take in for a minute about dealing with the whole real estate process and things that you definitely need to be aware of course, is closing costs, because sometimes people don't take that into consideration when they are actually purchasing a property. But it's a little humor there just to keep that in mind, but definitely it is something you need to be aware of. So on the agenda today, we're going to talk about your pre-home ownership assessment, the selection criteria, building versus buying, financing your home, closing the deal, home construction and maintenance. Of course, a big part of this will be the Q&A. I'm sure you have some questions out there, and I'll be free to and happy to answer those questions at the end. So let's talk about the pre-home ownership assessment and being prepared for home ownership. Some of the do's that you want to, be aware of, and that is to plan your strategy, get it down on paper. What do you want to do? What are the goals that you have? Just like anything that you have in life, you want to write it down, have goals and steps to achieve those goals. One of the things in home ownership for that goal is to get pre-qualified, right? And also to save. You can have a dream of being a homeowner, but if you don't have a plan and you don't save towards it, it just remains a dream, all right? But a goal is something that you actually put steps toward to make that dream a reality. Now, after you've already gotten in the process of saving and getting pre-qualified and knowing how much you actually qualify for, then you can begin the process of looking at properties. This is where you can go on the websites, and there's so many websites out there now. And we find in the real estate world, this is where the search begins. In the past, people would go driving around looking at properties or signs, but really everything is technology driven. And we saw that was especially true during the pandemic. You couldn't move about during the lockdowns. And so having a lot of virtual tours was a big deal for persons who especially could not visit the Bahamas or could not leave their property and they wanted to look at purchasing something in another island. Having a virtual tour, whether it's video or still photos, was key. And so, you find that has become a very big thing in the real estate market in the Bahamas now. People sometimes actually make a decision on a property without actually visiting the property. So that's obviously, having that at your fingertips. And so having those things and knowing what your budget is and your criteria allows you to become more knowledgeable. Then you can assess and act when you see something that matches the criteria and you've already saved for it. Because the worst thing to do is to see something that you like and then try and go and get qualified, because by the time you get approved, if you do, that property may no longer be available. And of course, I also stress before, you must save, because typically the rule of thumb is you should save anywhere from about 15 to 20% of the purchase price of a property, because you need to put down a down payment, which is anywhere from 5 to 10%, and then you have closing costs, which will be about 10% as well. Some of the don'ts. Don't act impulsively, right? A lot of persons, when they see something in a store that they like, they want to buy it immediately. Well, when you're purchasing a home, you want to definitely have a plan and not act impulsively, because this is something that's a long-term investment and most likely one of the largest investments you'll ever make in your life. You want to be, you don't want to be indecisive. We find sometimes a person may want a property today, and then next week they've changed their mind, or they may have buyer's remorse. If you have a criteria and you have a plan, then you should know exactly what is taking you towards that plan, and you can be a bit more decisive. Don't spend more than you can afford. Well, that is something that a lot of us need to learn, because sometimes we spend more than we actually can afford, or we may be able to afford the actual purchase of the property, but not think about the maintenance of that property, the insurance costs, the real property tax, and the ongoing maintenance of that property. That's very important, and you need to keep that in mind. So keep those all in your budget when you're looking at home ownership. Some of the selection criteria. The key determinants of a home purchase. Well, you've heard it before: location, 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 and that's still true. Location is important. You want to know the area and the appreciation of that area. You want to know about the neighbors. You want to know about, what is the value and the equity that you'll have in this property going forward. Obviously, in the Bahamas, topography is also important too, because you don't want to be in a low-lying area. that will become flood prone. Elevation is key, especially since we've seen what has happened following some hurricanes like Dorian and others in the country. You want to have the elevation, if you can, in the property. Zoning is key if you are looking at doing something, for example, that is multifamily. Don't end up purchasing a single family property and then hoping that you will get to build a multifamily property, because you may be denied, there would be roadblocks in the way, and ultimately it will not fulfill the purpose of why you purchased that property. Single family is usually the lowest level of the property. So if you build a single family home on a multifamily property, there's not an issue, but it can't be the other way around. You can't build a multifamily on a single family lot. Same thing is true for commercial. That would be the highest grade of the property, or highest and best use, as we would say in the business. Definitely know about the condition. Condition of a property will determine how much you have to spend to rehab that particular property if it's a home. If it's a vacant land, you don't have to worry as much about it, but if you're dealing with a home that is existing, you definitely want to know the condition, what you're getting into, what are the repairs that are needed. And I see a lot of persons who always like to go after bank foreclosures. One of the things with a bank foreclosure that you have to keep in mind is that if someone was unable to afford the actual maintenance and the loan for that house, the mortgage, chances are they didn't maintain the property, right? So that means you would have much more work to do on that end than if you were going after a property where the seller was motivated and they were keeping the property in good condition. So keep that in mind when you're purchasing. The next item there is the price. And so it's actually, as you can see, not the top item on this list. And usually it shouldn't be unless your price is the only determinant. But usually the other things like location, topography, zoning, condition would come before pricing. And then you have your utilities. Make sure that the property does have utilities at the lot. You know, be aware of the closing costs and that you actually can close on the property. Ensure that the property has clear and marketable title. And, you know, you definitely need to have an attorney for this part of the process, and make sure that the property is then registered with the government. So, you know, later on, there are no problems when you try and either sell this property or someone then claims that they have ownership of that property. Building versus buying. That's usually a question we get in the real estate industry. Should I build a home or should I buy an existing property? Well, generally, if you look at the do's and don'ts of buying an existing home, I would always say, well, first start with a licensed BRIA agent to represent you. And that is someone that you would trust and who's knowledgeable and professional in the industry, because they can guide you in the process. They do this every day for a living. And you know, they know the pitfalls that are out there. You want to buy early in the construction process so you can modify it to your taste and negotiate any savings if it's a new construction, right? And also definitely get an appraisal and a home inspection. The don'ts, like I said before, don't just run after foreclosures. I see that tends to be a mistake of a lot of people. And you know, they just think that they're just looking at price as opposed to the other determinants that I mentioned earlier. You know, you don't want to purchase a property without doing your due diligence on the area and the quality of the construction of that property. And you don't want to necessarily make deals with contractors or sellers that you don't trust. Obviously, that's a given. This other point here, not to involve too many cooks in your decision that don't have the expertise for the decision-making process. I've seen this a few times inside real estate. You have someone who's looking to purchase a property and they want to ask the opinion of a relative. Fine, a relative that they trust. But what if that relative does not have any expertise in real estate and they're just going based on something else? That could influence their decision and it may not be a wise decision in the long run. So always get persons who are knowledgeable in the industry, but not too many persons who can confuse your decision-making process. Building a home. Okay, so if some of the do's, choose a contractor wisely and get references.
21.
Okay, and also obtain your building permits and insurance.
25 cents.
Okay, I think someone else has their mic on, so we're hearing their audio coming through. So you probably want to just mute your mic. You want to definitely keep a track of all of your expenses, and of course, secure your building materials. Some of the don'ts, don't drag on the building process for too long. In some of the gated communities, there are penalties if you go over a period of time for your building process. So keep that in mind as well. There are penalties for that. Financing your home. Well, this is, of course, a key thing because making sensible financing decisions have some of the things that you must do. Understand how a mortgage works and determining what you can afford. That should be at the very start of your decision when you're going after a home or property. But I always would emphasize this, and this is something that would qualify a buyer at the very onset. You want to shop around and seek the help of a mortgage broker. I would say that is a good use of your time, as opposed to you going to different banks on your own. You can, engage the services of a mortgage broker, and they are paid by the bank or financial institution who actually provides the mortgage. So you don't have to worry about that cost, but they save you time because they will take your information and they will give it out to different entities to see how much you would qualify for. You definitely want to pay off outstanding credit cards and loans if possible to make sure that you would get the best possible loan from a bank or financial institution. Some of the don'ts: don't take out unnecessary loans. Well, yeah, like vacation loans, that sort of thing, things that you can do without. I can understand, like, if it's a medical concern, sure, but if you can do without it and you're trying to get that home, try and limit the amount of loans as possible that you have. The rule of thumb in the past was not to exceed a debt service ratio of 45%. Now, I know that has been changed a lot in recent years because a lot of financial institutions went beyond that to qualify persons, depending on how many years they had to retire, if they were a government worker, et cetera, and they thought that they were good credit risk. So that could vary, but you don't want to, at the end of the day and at the end of the month, not have enough to live on or to really enjoy your life, and everything is going towards a mortgage. The fundamentals of mortgage financing. Well, the key definitions that you need to know: your down payment. That would usually be 5% or 10%, and it could be higher if you're looking at a multifamily lot or a commercial property. So if a financial institution is giving you 95% financing, you would typically have to come up with 5%. If they're giving you 90% financing, you have to come up with 10%. It all should add back up to 100%. Usually with a multifamily property or commercial property, that down payment could be anywhere between 20% or higher, okay? Because that's considered more risk. You're not living in the property, so the chances of you defaulting may be higher. Principal, that is the amount that you actually borrow. Interest, that is the cost of the loan and how the bank makes their money. And the term of the policy, of course, is the life of the loan. The type of mortgages that you would see out there would be a fixed rate, and that's where you have a constant interest rate and periodic payments throughout the life of the mortgage. The other one would be an adjustable rate mortgage, where you have interest rate adjustments depending on an index level, and that could be a prime or LIBOR plus a certain percentage. How much of a mortgage can you afford? Well, we talked about the debt service ratio earlier, but make sure that your monthly debt payment divided by your monthly income, that's what determines your debt service ratio. That's the calculation right there. And you want to limit it to 45%, but I understand in today's world that's sometimes not always plausible. But if you can, don't exceed that. And a good example there is if you're making $3,000 a month, your mortgage should not be more than $1,350 a month. The mortgage indemnity insurance may also be needed for your loan as well. And that's something that just is a guarantee for the bank that it will be paid off in the event that, you have a demise in, yourself or your spouse in the loan. So where do you get your mortgage? Well, banks, it can be a credit union. It could be an insurance company, or you may have private financing or a wealthy family member or friend who can assist you with financing. Closing the deal. So closing costs that you need to consider when you're getting a loan for a mortgage. They have an origination fee, or sometimes they call it a commitment fee, and that usually ranges between 1% to 2% of the loan that you're getting. You also have legal fees, which would be on average about 2% of the actual conveyance. And then you may have a mortgage fee if you're getting a mortgage of about 1%. So altogether, you're looking at about 3% in legal fees if you're getting both the conveyance and the mortgage. You also have the government transfer tax. They used to call this stamp tax, and now they've just changed the name to VAT, or value-added tax. And not to be confused with the VAT that you would pay at the point of service, which is 12%. This is actually 10%, and it's split between the buyer and seller. So that would be 5% each. So first-time buyers are exempt up to $500,000. And you have legal fees where the buyer and seller are responsible for their own fees plus the VAT. Now that VAT is actually 12%, okay? You also have the mortgage indemnity insurance that I mentioned before, and then you have the real estate agent commission or brokerage fee, and you have on vacant land, that would be 10%, on developed property, 6%. And that is paid by the seller, because that's who is that fiduciary responsibility is to the seller. In the Bahamas, the agents typically represent the seller, even if there are two agents involved, because we don't typically have buyer representation in the Bahamas when it comes to real estate. So, and that is an example of how that works out on the side there in that graph. Home construction and maintenance, understanding the home construction process. Well, you'll have to have architectural plans drawn and approved from town planning. You also have to get insurance, and in this case, building insurance for the construction. You have the contractor outlines the sequence of the home construction, from the excavation and clearing of the property to the foundation, to the bell course, putting on the roof, windows, doors, finishing the interiors, which is usually a very costly part of it. You have the sewerage and waste disposal, and then finishing. Then you also have an inspection by an approved lender or quantity surveyor, and the occupancy certificate, which is issued by the government thereafter. Some ongoing expenses you must consider, and that's repairs and maintenance. And sometimes a lot of people forget this, okay? As well as landscaping. Once you finish a building, you have that landscaping that needs to be done to give it that curb appeal. And you should create a budget line item, ongoing for your maintenance, right, and repairs. You need that home insurance, and estimated between 1.2% of the value of the property a year for your premium. And then, of course, you have your real property tax. You have an exemption up to $250,000. And that's actually for all properties in the Bahamas, not just first home owners, but $250,000 on the value is exempt. And then you pay over that between $250,000 to $500,000. It's basically 0.625%, and over $500,000, it's 1%. If you live in a gated community, you would have homeowner association fees that you need to budget for. Those are usually issued either once or twice a year. And of course, in the zone that we live in, we have hurricanes, so you have to prepare for that and keep that in mind as well. Now, we're going into the Q&A section right now, but I know that some of you may have also had some questions about the government program for young professionals. And I just wanted to touch briefly on that. Not much information has been shared on that, but I will say that when it comes to the affordable housing plan for young Bahamian professionals, keep in mind that there are certain key points that you need to be aware of. That you have 83 acres of land that are proposed for the Western New Providence, south of Sanford Drive. and an additional 2 plots of land identified in the western area. The home must be completed in 2 years, within 2 years of purchase, and it's currently before Parliament. It's designed for persons between the ages of 18 to 45, and 40% of the lots will be multifamily at $50,000, and 60% will be single family at $40,000. The government has given or put a figure out there, an estimated value of $150,000 for these lots, which are to be 95 by 100. However, I put a question mark to that because we won't know exactly what the value of those lots will be until we see the infrastructure in place. And we have some appraisals done because it has to be taken into consideration the sale prices of other lots in that area to give you an estimate of value of that property. The government has said that they will bear the cost of the infrastructure, and they are going to give concessions, a waiver of custom duties on all building materials and appliances, as well as real property tax exemption for 2 years after the construction and 1 year without stamp tax or VAT. There will be 10 approved Ministry of Work architectural designs for homeowners to choose from at a cost of $1,000. And there has been a committee that has been established to set the rules and policies for the selection process. The banks may provide construction loans with no down payment on the land equity, subject to the appraisal. And I say subject to the appraisal, and of course, that's obviously within the purview of those banks on what they think that land would be worth. And the government has the first right of refusal to purchase the property back in the event of a sale. Some things that I think you need to consider with this, although the overall it's beneficial to those that qualify. You have equity for land. There's a lack of equity for land developers, right? So if you are a land developer in the country and you do this for a living, where you purchase large tracts of land and you split it up and then sell it, you now are competing with the government. So the equity there is, should these developers then be competing with the government? Is that fair for them? You also have buyers of property in other areas of the country that made a sacrifice and are building elsewhere, but they don't have access to these exemptions because they will not be inside this area. So then again, there's a lack of equity for them. And who and how will the process be managed to ensure that the building materials that are imported will be used on the specific site? That's a whole management process, and we know how things sometimes go. And who will be responsible for the community maintenance, the green space, the pool that I heard would be going there? Is it the homeowners who will be responsible, or is it taxpayers who will then be responsible for maintaining this? And if it's not maintained, then of course, what happens with the value of the property in the area. Then there's also, I think, a lack of equity and consideration for persons over 45 that never had the opportunity to own their own home, and now they don't qualify. And of course, I know because they're over 45, they wouldn't be considered a young professional or a young person in this case, but that's something that you should also consider for persons who still want to own their own home, but may not fall within that age range. The application process needs to be very transparent for young professionals. And what about the young professionals that already have existing property? Will they be treated equally with those persons that do not, right? So those are all, things I thought came to mind when I looked at the plan myself. I felt a more equitable solution would have been to reduce taxes across the board for first home buyers. I know that there is already the first home exemption up to $500,000, but that could be taken further to waive the VAT on legal fees for the buyer, as well as on VAT for construction costs that are purchased in the country, irrespective of the location of the building. So then it gives a lot more parity and equity for persons who are not just 18 to 45, and it can be outside of that community. And then the government doesn't have to actually compete with other land developers as well. So that's the end of my presentation for today. I'll leave it open for some Q&A. I know we have some time for that. And if you have a question, just let me know. Thank you so much.
Hi, Elbert. Kriston Moore here from the CFA Society. So we do have a couple of questions. You can hear me, correct?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, so we do have a couple of questions for you. Firstly, how do you find a mortgage broker?
Okay, so finding a mortgage broker, well, that's another thing that if you have a real estate agent that's knowledgeable in the field, they usually would have access to that information, so they can refer you to a person who does that. But you can also find them online. You can actually just go in Google and actually type in Bahamas mortgage broker, and you'll get some names as well. But yeah, I have some resources personally that I would send out to persons, and so that's an easy call, a value-added service that we would provide.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Regarding the tax exemption for first timers, is that applicable to both purchase of vacant land and purchasing a home?
So the tax exemption is applicable definitely for the first home. Now, in the past, when persons purchased land, they sometimes wavered on whether or not they would give it to them. I think that has been cleared up, and now hopefully, once you have a really good attorney, that shouldn't be an issue. That's something that would be applied as well for the exemption.
Okay, thank you. Next would be, what should be the average budget for a single family home, inclusive of maintenance and closing costs and utilities?
So that all depends on the person involved, because that's tailored to a specific individual, right? Because someone who is looking at a $200,000 home, for example, would have a different budget than someone who's looking at a $600,000 home. And you do have some persons who are getting their first home at that level, depending on the background of that person, the type of work that they do, maybe family history. So it all depends. But I would say, for maintenance, you want to at least budget 1% of the value of the house per year. And for insurance, about 1.2% of the value of the property, right? So keep those things in mind going forward.
Okay, thanks. And sorry, regarding your previous statement on the tax exemption, can you clarify if the exemption is to be paid and then refunded, or how does that work?
Okay, so some financial institutions, they wanted to see that you had the closing costs, all of the closing costs, meaning inclusive of the VAT in your account in order to close the transaction, even though you may be exempt, because they want to know that if the government denies you, you can still close the transaction. However, I've seen some financial institutions where they have relaxed that policy, and they don't require you to have that in your account at this point, and you can close with the hope that you will get the exemption.
Okay, great, thanks. And also along those that same line, is the process difficult to qualify for the government stamp duty exemption for first-time homeowners, or is it a fairly simple process for the most part?
It shouldn't be difficult. Once you don't have a property out there registered in your name or your spouse's name and you're buying together, they will do a search and it should be fine. Now, if you have another property out there that you're not declaring, they probably will find it and they'll probably decline it.
Understood. Okay. And I guess, well, speaking of audits in that sense, considering the government is conducting an audit on all its crown land, what are the possible implications of this for the average Bahamian?
Well, those persons who may have had crown land in their family or in their name and they haven't done anything with it, of course, if usually when you get crown land, it's usually subject to you doing something with the property, right? Usually they say it's for agricultural purposes or whatever. If they find that you're not doing anything with it, they may, of course, take it back and then either grant it to someone else who wants to do it, or take it back in their portfolio and develop it for housing or whatever, because they seem to be going through now and seeing how they can provide a bit more housing, since that is definitely a need out there for young persons, and not just young persons, but persons on the whole.
Okay, thanks. So also, especially in the news, we've been hearing a lot of people say that, the real estate market right now is pretty hot, especially the high end market. So what's your take on how real estate sales are doing during the pandemic? Is that strictly just related to the high end segment, or what's your overall take?
So in the Bahamas, we really have two separate markets, right? We have the local market, where you have properties that are actively being purchased by locals, say between 200,000 and 500,000. And then you have the foreign market that is over 750, for example. The pandemic last year definitely slowed down real estate activity when we were in lockdown. So when we were able to get back out and work again, there definitely was a lot of pent-up activity, because persons who were hoping to do things were now actively trying to make that deal happen. So you found that there was a resurgence in local activity in that price point. However, there's a lack of inventory or supply in available properties under 300,000. So you may find a few properties over 300,000, but the thing is now getting people to qualify over 300,000. A lot of people qualify under 300,000, but the supply is definitely limited. Now, and so those persons are a lot of times missing out on opportunities, because when they try to get something, it's gone. With the high-end market, we found that, or the luxury market, we found that there were persons who were, again, online and looking at things virtually from their condo locked up in New York or Toronto when they were in lockdown. And because they can now work remotely, they prefer to do it in a setting like the Bahamas, where you have great weather and they can be out on the beach and still, get their work done. So you found that there was a resurgence in that type of buyer who wants to be in a more luxury setting, away from a lot of people, in big cities, and they can add that to their asset base, right? So that definitely was a resurgence as well. And there were persons, of course, purchasing sight unseen as well.
Okay, thanks. And I guess further to that, considering that, I guess the average Bahamian or many Bahamians, don't qualify for a home that's over 300,000. Do you know of any, I guess, solution to the supply issue? Like, do you know of any developments currently going on for people who would qualify for something under 300,000, apart from the government's plans?
There are some properties out there, not necessarily large scale, but there are a few, hit and miss properties that you can get a lot for, let's say, $100,000. And once you get a good contractor, then you just have to make sure you design that within a budget where, again, going back to the budget, where you can have the construction limited to $200,000. So then you know what the cost of the land is, what the cost of your construction is, and you know what your overall cost is that you're aiming for. You want to keep it no more than $300,000, so you know what you're working with. So you can find lots still at $100,000 and in fairly nice areas. And there are actually one or two gated communities where you may be able to find a lot at $100,000 as well.
Okay, well, speaking of construction, can you speak to the rising cost of construction and the expected impact on home ownership? I guess, do you see this becoming a serious hindrance to home ownership at some point?
Yes, it definitely will. Anytime you have an increase in costs, you will have, that there'll be pressure on persons who are trying to purchase, especially if they're already at the top of what they can afford. And I've heard from some contractors where they are saying that construction costs have gone up at least 35% since the pandemic. So that obviously will be passed on to persons that are building. When you now look at, if you go back to that presentation that I just made, building versus buying, it always would make more sense from a cost-effective approach to get something that's already built. Those costs are already there. They're not new costs, but if you try to replicate that building now, you're looking at almost a 35% increase on that existing building. Now, I know some people just want to have something customized for their own taste because that's what they wanted. They want the kitchen a certain way, or they want the house positioned a certain way, and this house isn't that way. But is it worth the cost? Is the cost benefit analysis there for the additional 35%? Or can you take the existing house that's there and just do some modifications at a lower cost? So that's a decision you have to make.
Understood. Okay, I think that's all the questions I have immediately. I'll give it another minute or so to see if anyone else has any other additional questions, and if not, I'll pass it off to Jerome.
Hi, somebody sent me a question. They asked, can you advise on purchasing a second home in the US?
Is the purpose of the second home for investment, or they plan to, is that a vacation property, or they plan to live there? What's their objective?
Vacation.
Vacation property? Okay. I know a lot of Bahamians in the past used to do the whole timeshare thing. I know some Bahamians that actually own second home properties in the US, and when they're not there, sometimes they put it on Airbnb. If they don't need the money, they may just lock it up and just keep it for themselves. When it comes to buying a home in another country like the United States, you can use that to definitely diversify your portfolio, just like how persons come here to do the same thing. You can use a local broker here to get you started, and we can refer you out to one of our contacts in the United States or whatever country you're looking at, and we would connect you. Because one thing about, let's say, for example, I'm at H.G. Christie. We're a part of the Christie's brand. So we would have affiliates in other countries. And so one thing, that the service and the level of product is going to be similar and seamless. So we can feel free to share that particular contact with another referring broker to help you in that market, because they should have knowledge and expertise in their local market. I wouldn't be knowledgeable and have that expertise of what's happening, let's say, for example, in Aspen. But if I refer you to someone in Aspen, they would take it over from there. Just like someone who's in New York that may have a buyer for the Bahamas, they won't know the Bahamas like I would. So that would be referred out to me.
Okay, I actually have another question for you. I find when persons are looking to do construction, one of the costs I think they don't necessarily take into consideration until they start getting quotes from contractors is that contractors charge VAT. So for instance, if your house costs, I don't know, $400,000 to construct, they're going to charge you 12% just purely on VAT. So you're looking at an additional almost $50,000 on your cost just going to paying VAT. So with that in mind, does it make sense for persons to try to construct out of pocket or without using a contractor? What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, so yeah, that's a significant cost. However, you have to look at the mentality of the person who's going to be doing this. Are they able to take on being a general contractor? Is it something that they have experience with? If it's something that they have experience with and they can manage this process and have subcontractors that they can oversee, yeah, then they can save the money. Definitely do it. If it's not something that's your expertise and you feel as though it may be over your head, then hire a professional to do it for you so it's done correctly the right time. Because if you're trying to save that $50,000 by doing it yourself, it could cost you a lot more in the long run if you don't know what you're doing, and people take advantage of you, and you could be out much more than $50,000. And again, your time is valuable too. So do you have the time to do it? Is it worth your time doing it there or doing using your time where you actually make the majority of your money and your expertise, and then outsourcing this to someone that does this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because some people their hair would go gray trying to manage a process like this if they have no expertise in it.
Another question came in. I guess as a realtor, generally speaking, what would you consider? I guess for somebody looking to invest in real estate, perhaps to rent or sell, what areas do you find to be the most desirable? I guess more so for Bahamians in general, not necessarily the luxury market. What areas would you, I guess, perhaps recommend a young investor to look at?
So if you're looking at a property or something that you can get a return on your money on, as you know, the banks are not paying hardly anything on your money right now. So a lot of persons, even locally, are trying to get their money out of the banks and into real estate. A good thing would be if you cannot afford a luxury property, you can start off by just doing one property. Let's say, for example, in the Cable Beach area, you know that's an area that's in high demand. You have a lot of expats that want to live in that area. So you know that you can possibly get a good tenant, and it doesn't have to be a multi-unit facility. You can just get one unit, one condo, and rent it out. I know of things, right now that are around the $300,000 price range that are currently rented and are for sale. So you don't even have to look for a tenant. So that is an investment opportunity for persons, that is waiting there for them to get the rental income plus the capital appreciation on the property, the equity as it builds up over time. That doesn't require you to start, getting a vacant lot and building and then trying to find a tenant. No, this is already there. It's already furnished. It's ready to go. So those are the type of opportunities you should be looking for.
Any more questions for Elbert? If not, we're going to wrap up. So last
Yeah.
chance.
One last question. So there seems to be a lot of keys in the Bahamas being sold by real estate firms outside of the Bahamas. Why is this?
Now, I'm not sure why that is the case. Now, if you're actually, there you get my video there. So if you're actually selling property in the Bahamas, it should be with a local broker. Now, they may be collaborating with a foreign broker who's referring them, and so they're working together, but it must be, by the law, a Bahamian real estate firm involved in that transaction. Now, you may see sometimes in the lead and in the marketing a foreign company, but behind the scenes, it's usually a Bahamian broker that's associated with that as well.
Okay, great. Thanks. Jerome, I think that's all the questions we have so far. So I'll pass it over to you.
All right. Thank you. Definitely thank you again, Elbert, for joining us again this year. Very informative. Definitely appreciate your take on the service laws, providing more information about that. I know that's definitely been a big area of interest for a lot of people. And a lot of us, generally just want more information on it, more transparency around it, but we're subject to whatever the government provides. But yeah, definitely appreciate your expertise. Send aside time for us today, answering our questions. Really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody who joined us today. Hopefully you would have get something from today's presentation that definitely assists you along your journey. Elbert, I don't know if you have any last words.
Well, I would just like to say thank you for having me again for your presentation. I encourage you and everyone who's listening to always gather as much knowledge as you can, especially about the home buying process, because knowledge is power and power leads to wealth. And that's what we're all about, the wealth creation business, so that we can, get a piece of this rock. Thank you so much once again.
Sure, definitely. To everybody, next week will be our last seminar or last part of our financial literacy series. We'll be discussing the credit bureau, the expected impact on us. Obviously, all of the topics that we discussed are connected between budgeting to save money and invest that money that we would have saved. Also look at real estate as a potential investment or home ownership, and also how the credit bureau will impact us and our ability or access to capital, whether we want to invest it or purchase a home or whatever we want to do with it. So it's all tied together, and we'll wrap it up next week. So please stay tuned, and I'll see you guys next week. Thanks, everybody, and good night.
Good night.